Hello and welcome to Liverpool Transfer Daily. I'm your host, David Comerford, and I'm joined by David Lynch. And we're going to discuss, first of all, a player who looks like he isn't going to be on his way to Liverpool in the form of Enzo Fernandez. A lot of reports suggesting that he will actually be going to Chelsea instead. Chelsea paying 112 million, which will be a Premier League record. So there's a few angles, I think, to approach this from. David, I think the first one would be, why do you think Liverpool haven't decided to pay the money for Fernandez, a player that they clearly like, based on kind of everything we've seen and heard? But is it simply a case of maybe saving money for someone else who plays at Borussia Dortmund?
Yeah, I think that's very much sort of a good read of the situation, really. I think, for Liverpool, as far as they're concerned, I think it's probably would be maybe too much for them to go for two midfielders of that profile in terms of how much it would cost. I think they know that they need to do quite a bit to the midfield, really, and they don't really know what Jude Bellingham's going to cost at the moment, although it's going to be an awful lot of money, and he is the number one target, so Enzo Fernandez, I think Liverpool will be fully aware of what he wanted, and they'll have been in touch. I've no doubt about that. Player of that level of quality, is not someone you sort of ignore, and Liverpool will have been tracking him. I've no doubts about that. But Jude Bellingham is and always has been the priority. So they need to keep that money there to do a deal of that size. In the next summer, hopefully. I suppose. The big concern is if you don't get Jude Bellingham next summer and you've allowed Enzo Fernandez to join a rival, and it's, you've missed out on two of the big midfield talents out there, two arguably generational talents. They're that sort of level of quality. But, as things stand, no one has won that Jude Bellingham race. So Liverpool hope by keeping the powder dry now and not going in for this one, that, that they're in a position to pip other teams to get Jude Bellingham.
And just to pick up on that, we know that Bellingham is the top target. To miss out on Fernandez, do you think that increases the pressure on Liverpool to get Bellingham, not just from a competitive standpoint, but maybe from almost a reputational one as well? Because they have, the messaging has been very much that those two are targets, of one of them going to a Premier League rival. Do you think now almost you don't want to necessarily be guided by this, but to keep a lid on supporters' frustrations, it's even more important now to land Bellingham?
Yeah, I think there's huge pressure on Liverpool to do it now, not least because it's coloured their transfer business for maybe the past 3 years now, 2-3 years. It's been talked that Jude Bellingham is going to be a target when he becomes available. This is why we're not spending in this window. This is why the midfield has not maybe had the attention given to it that is needed for such a long time. So the idea that they then miss out, and I mean, it's not just the idea of missing out to Real Madrid. I think that in itself would be really disappointing. Because Real Madrid have had Liverpool's number in recent years in the Champions League and things like that. But sometimes you've got to hold your hands up if a player goes to Real Madrid. I don't think they're as close in the running, because I do think a return to England would be probably the preferred destination at this point in his career. Maybe Real Madrid is something you try a little further down the line. You also look at the fact that Camavinga went there and didn't really, he's played a lot of games, but he's been a sub mostly, and it's had to come off the bench. I think that will maybe not appeal. But I think if say Manchester City made a late run, and I don't think they've done as much legwork as maybe Liverpool to convince Jude Bellingham, but if they put a late run together, and they're a very convincing package, let's be honest, they win the Premier League every year. They probably will again this year, despite Arsenal getting off to a good start. They can pay what they can pay. And I'm sure they will win the Champions League at some point. They're always in the running for it. So that's a very convincing package. And if Liverpool lose out to Manchester City, I think there will be huge uproar. And so because it's losing to a rival, and they've built the whole transfer ideas around getting him in at some point. So I think there will be, fans will be rightly hugely frustrated if that were to happen. So I think you're right. I think there is huge pressure on Liverpool, and they've got to get this right, because they've taken huge risks in not getting a midfielder in, particularly last summer, and we've seen that's one of the main reasons this season has fallen apart slightly. So yeah, they can't afford really to lose out when Jude Bellingham comes out on the market.
And looking at Fernandez specifically, then, and maybe moving away from the kind of transfer angle and the repercussions. I mean, is this a transfer really that, we're looking at a Premier League record fee, could potentially alter the dynamics of the Premier League top four race? Obviously, Chelsea are a long way back, but he's clearly a special talent, and I guess for Liverpool, it's almost a double blow in the sense that not only do you have kind of the regret of seeing one of your targets thrown in a direct rival, but also, it could be something that gives Chelsea a real push in this kind of second half of the season.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is that, with Chelsea at the moment, they spent a lot of money in the summer and haven't looked particularly good since, and bought players who I thought were, some real talent brought in, but it's just not quite worked out. And they still seem to be really finding their feet under Graham Potter. So, whether a young midfielder, even of such huge talent, will have a transformative effect, I'm not quite sure, because I think there's still problems there, things that they have to work out. And they've thrown a lot of money since Todd Bowley's come in, and it's not worked out perfectly. So I don't think it's a guarantee of anything. I don't think it necessarily hugely changes everything for them, unless he comes in and just completely dominates in a way that would maybe surprise, especially because he's coming to a new league. He'd only been in Europe for 6 months as well. There's a lot of pressure being placed on him there. But there is some disappointment there for Liverpool, and if he does settle in quickly, and Chelsea are not too far behind at all, could really bring them back into it, which would make things difficult. Liverpool, I suppose, they've got. I think that's one of the reasons maybe why they just need to do something in midfield, because I think just to bring some sort of structure and stability to this team, because you can see that there's still goals in the attack. I think the defense, if you protect it better, is it's not complete. Not every player is completely dropped off a cliff. I just think they just need that stability in the centre of park, and things will look good. And then you win 4 or 5 on the bounce, and all of a sudden you'll definitely be in the top 4, given the there's flaws in the teams in the race. So I think Liverpool just needs to look at this as they might not think that, okay, Enzo Fernandez completely drags Chelsea back into it, but for their own sake, just maybe need to look at doing something in the short term to maybe solidify things, because otherwise I can't see, whether it's Chelsea overtaking them or whatever. I just think Newcastle and Manchester United look a lot more solid in this moment, and that's maybe a bigger worry in this moment, that they just really need to stay in touch with them. And I think as things stand, that's difficult to see, because too many of the games are too chaotic in the centre of the park.
Yeah, maybe should be focused more on looking ahead rather than over our shoulders. And yeah, I think it's interesting with the whole midfield situation, as Liverpool are in a position where they need the instant impact, but does that impact come from spending a lot of money on a proven player, or does it come from, like you say, just getting someone in there who can almost restore structure to the side? But speaking of one player who has already arrived, in Cody Gakpo, looking like he's going to make his debut against Wolves at the weekend after he was officially registered. A couple of players that have touched on the lift it will give to see Gakpo arrive, almost akin to Luis Diaz last year. I mean, how important is that, especially in light of what happened against Brentford?
Yeah, we've seen that there is like a mental boost that comes with new players coming in. I think it sort of adds something to training as well, and sort of gives everyone around the place a lift. You don't. I think it's a different situation in that Diaz came into a team that was flying and made it even better, and that was helpful. You don't want to put too much pressure on Gakpo by saying, okay, you can come in and fix all these problems. I think one thing he will come in and do, and you hope, is that, with his goal numbers, okay, he might never be able to transfer them to the Premier League at that level, that high level. But, if he can bring some goals, that's helpful, because, Liverpool's games at the moment, they've been, it's been like watching basketball at times. It's just end to end because they don't control things. And if that's the case, you've got Núñez sort of just struggling a little bit at the moment in terms of his finishing. I think that will come, but it's definitely a thing that's happening at the moment. So to have someone else in the front three who can come in, who's a natural finisher in that position, and he's shown it time and time again, that might be helpful. Because if Liverpool, if they're not going to control games and it's just going to be like this from now on, then just to have more goal scorers on the pitch will definitely help them to to fall on the right side of that more often than not. That sort of trapeze act almost. So hopefully he can do that, and hopefully it's just a little bit of a mental boost for the players in terms of, okay, we've got this quality in now. This guy can help us, and that will help them to kick on in the second part of the season.
And one last question on Gakpo before we wrap up, and it's thinking back really to something that you mentioned there. When Diaz came in last season, he played very well, but he didn't necessarily have the numbers, but that was okay. Obviously, the performances were there, and there were maybe the team was just doing a lot better generally, so there wasn't as much pressure. One of the things I've been wondering with Gakpo is, does he face a lot more pressure than a signing normally would because of not only how Liverpool are struggling in terms of give the amount of chances they're giving up, but also the pressure, like you say, that puts on them to take their chances at the other end. It feels like he really, not almost for his sake, but for the team's sake, is going to be expected or forced almost to hit the ground running.
Yeah, I think there is a pressure there, because I think there's a real clear vacancy for him on that left hand side. It's very obvious where he's going to play in the short term and what Liverpool want from him. They don't want to use Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, who's been traditionally a midfielder in recent years. They don't want him out on that left hand side. They obviously don't think Fabio Carvalho is ready to sort of take on that workload. So Gakpo is coming in to sort of salvage things in terms of, you've got to play on this left hand side of the attack, and you've got to make us good enough to get into the top four for the rest of the season. So I think there is a pressure around that. I've spoke to Virgil van Dijk around it, and he says he thinks that's a pressure he could maybe cope with. He will know him well from the Dutch team, and we'll have a good read on whether he can cope with it. But you never really know until the player's in there. So that's something that Liverpool fans have got to hope he can deal with. And he's been the sort of talisman for PSV for a while, so maybe that will help him adapt. And he's been the main man there. He doesn't necessarily have to be that. He just has to be one of many in a functioning side, and just try and bring as many goals as he can. Hopefully can deal with that pressure and really help Liverpool to kick on, because they definitely need it. I think if they continue in this current form, then they will. They're looking at finishing 6th, 7th, 8th.
Yeah, and Gakpo, like you say, has been used to shouldering a lot of responsibility in that PSV side. Won the captain's armband and is the team's best player. So hopefully it'd be a lot to ask of someone so young. But if he can come in and almost try and give the team a lift in that way and be that such a big character straight off the bat, then that could be huge too. But thanks very much, David. That'll wrap us up for this morning's stream. Make sure you check out all the written content that goes up on liverpool.com today. And we'll be back tomorrow for more. So yeah, until then, enjoy the rest of your day.